Hello everyone, I am Luxon, and welcome to the second channel where the content can be anything, and this time it is Trails in the Sky first chapter. Thanks to GungHo Entertainment, I've been provided with a review code for the game, and as this is a faithful remake and there's not a strict review embargo in place, I am able to talk about basically everything I go through, and since I've already done a pretty comprehensive overview of the prologue by way of the demo, I figured why not also make videos on each of the other chapters of the game as I get through them. And these are going to be specifically designed for people who have played at least the original Trails in the Sky first and second chapter. I will be spoiling both of those games and comparing them to this remake, while also explaining basically everything that happens in the remake itself. If you have not played those games, and are planning on starting the series with either this remake or the original Sky, don't watch this or any of the following videos on this channel at all. Once I'm completely done with the game, I will upload a complete non-spoiler review to my main channel as my final recommendations for everything and more concise thoughts on whether or not to start the series here, from the perspective of someone who has not only played the entire series, but 100%ed the entire remake on the maximum difficulty. Also, all the video I'm going to be using in this and every other video, as well as probably the final review itself, is just going to be my recordings of the entire playthrough of the prologue demo I did, so you don't need to watch this video whatsoever to get anything out of this. The footage is going to be completely unrelated and just stuff from not the chapter I'm even talking about. With that out of the way, though, what do I think of Chapter 1 of the remake? Well, my thoughts are very, very similar to the ones I had on the prologue, so this video is probably going to be a lot shorter than that one. It is still very good and a very, very faithful recreation. Through this entire chapter, the main story has still been basically identical to the original game, of course barring the different English localization, and all the areas are just the original layouts remade in 3D, with anywhere enemies are present expanded to accompany the real-time action RPG battle style. Compared to the last chapter, where most of my complaints were just based on the new localization, they land a lot more on the side of the game itself with this one. I think the localization in Chapter 1 is significantly better than it was in the prologue. Now, I didn't go back and replay the entire prologue on the full game to double check, but as far as I can tell, this is a different localization build than the demo had, namely because two NPCs I commented on earlier have had their names changed. Orium and Arya have been reverted to Armand and Ellie, maintaining continuity with the Crossbell arc and fixing a major problem I pointed out in my video on the prologue. There were also several typos and grammatical errors in the prologue, and the only things like that I saw in the entirety of Chapter 1 were a couple active voice lines where the subtitles did not match what was actually being said, but both sentences were completely grammatically accurate and made sense. Again, I'd like to point out, I am playing the game early, there's a good chance there's going to be a day one patch that might fix other errors like this, and I'm not 100% sure that this is the final build of the game, period, because when I input the review code, it said Trails in the Sky first chapter for beta testing was added to your library. So, while it does count as the game in my Steam library and I'm able to earn achievements completely fine, there's a decent chance that if you download it on PC on release or pop in your physical media, it's going to be a later edit pass of the localization than the one I'm looking at now. Keep in mind, the original version of the Switch demo mistakenly used an older version of the localization that also lacked 3 languages, and in addition to having more errors and some untranslated text, some voice lines used completely different takes, some of which had a completely different script than the final demo localization, and I would assume the prologue if I played through it again on this version of the game, so even voice lines are somewhat subject to change, though I wouldn't expect any major things like the name of the kingdom's pronunciation being changed back to Liberl because it's said several hundred times throughout this game. That being said though, it really feels like Chapter 1 is a completely different localization build than the prologue had in the demo, because there's a lot less unnatural and janky seeming dialogue, and stylistically, every character is portrayed a lot closer to how they were in the original localizations in later games they appeared in. Basically, I got to Olivier, they completely nailed him in this localization, so I'm much less concerned about it for the rest of the game than I was just after the demo. From what I could tell, more NPCs in the Bose region have their names consistent with the original games compared to Roland, though this might just be because Exceed in the original game did not make as many changes with NPC names based on what they were called in Japanese. While a few quartz and item names are still different, and you could start buying fish in this chapter, a lot of the fish names have been changed for some reason. There are a few things that, based on how the prologue localization was, I wouldn't have expected them to keep consistent with later games. Septium Vein, a quartz that was first added to the series in Sky SC, has been backported to this remake of First Chapter, and it is still called that in the localization despite having a name completely in kanji and Japanese. Besides that, as far as gameplay goes, the arts defense increasing quartz are still called arts defense instead of shield, and 2 fire art names are still different from the original games. Volcanic Rave is Volcanic Rays in the remake, and Napalm Breath is Napalm Blow. Those are only weird because their Japanese names are just the English names from the Xseed localization written out in katakana, so these are completely arbitrary and unnecessary changes, especially since that's the same for basically every other art in the game, and those are unchanged. While the names of all 4 tetracyclic towers are still different in this build, and that is largely because the Xseed names are associating them with fictional materials that appear elsewhere in the game they have no connection to in the Japanese version, the name tetracyclic towers for the connection of all 4 of them is used directly in Chapter 1, so it does still seem like every single relevant proper noun that's appearing in a later game is going to stay the same. For another example, the Sky Pirates are officially called the Kapua family a bunch of times here, the Intelligence Division of the Royal Army is still called that, and all sorts of things like that. While the localization seems a lot improved to me, unfortunately, modern Falcom's voice actor budget rears its ugly head again, and a lot less of Chapter 1 is voiced than the prologue was. In terms of big bombastic production value for your important remake of the original game, that's not great, but it does seem like, for non-voiced lines, this build of the GungHo script is allowing itself to go a little bit more out there in the same way the Xseed script was. And that, combined with there still being a lot of active voice lines that add new personality and brand new dialogue to the game, does still keep the classic Trails in the Sky charm going. At this point, I'm guessing that the inability to use anything verbatim from the Xseed script was some kind of licensing issue, because every single line is different, but they call back to a lot of major things that Xseed made iconic, even if it's not in the same place or with the exact same wording. There's some NPC dialogue where Estelle directly mentions her quote, big stick, and there's an active voice line in this chapter where Estelle refers to Josette as a tomboy like she does almost every single time she mentions her in the original Sky trilogy, even if that's not what she usually says in this version. Also, now having gotten to the end of Chapter 1, I can definitely say Josette's new VA is doing a great job, and I'm excited to hear all her battle dialogue from SC. Chapter 1 script seems a lot more willing to use slang compared to the prologue, which immediately makes it feel like much less of a dry and sterile translation. There's an active voice line where Joshua calls Estelle salty for still complaining about Cassius calling her a bad cook. A soldier in Haken Gate, after you drop off the ledger for that side quest, says he's so eepy after having been watching over a prisoner all night, which that is a line that I would totally expect to see in a Trails localization in 2025. Just not out of liberal army soldier watching over a prisoner. So I don't know what to make about that. It's funny at least. And then, again, most importantly, Olivier is allowed to be 100% Olivier, and they just let Matt Mercer completely shitpost with the voice acting the entire time, and it is just as great as I was hoping it would be. In his and Shara's last scene on the airliner where she overhears him talking to Mueller, when she starts grilling him about maybe being an Erebonian spy, he says something along the lines of, "What do you mean, can't a girl catch a break?" And she responds with, "Does this girl want to become a woman? My whip could help with that," which is one of several pretty major story moments in this chapter where I couldn't tell that this wasn't an Xseed or Geofront localization, and was done by, as far as I can tell, completely new people to the Trail series. While we're talking about that Olivier and Shara scene though, it's the first instance I was able to find of an actual significant plot change to the game that allows it to connect better with later games in the series. The content of the scene is still identical to the original, but because of the changed visual style, they needed to show more things than they did in the original. It only focuses on Olivier while he's talking, you don't hear Mueller just like you did in the original, but we now get to see the device he's using to communicate with, and it is the sonorous seashell. This is an artifact that doesn't show up in the series until Cold Steel 3, where it's revealed that the members of the original Class 7 have a special network on their ordnance that allows them to video call across long distances, even when they wouldn't have normal equivalent of cell service for orbital phones. That is facilitated by an artifact Olivier has in his possession called the sonorous seashell. Once that was introduced in Cold Steel 3, you could always assume that that's what he was using in the Sky cutscene, but I was kinda always under the impression that he was using some sort of Reinford prototype long-range radio, and Mueller just happened to be, like, in the south of Erebonia when he was listening to that. Like, His family is from Parm, which is the southernmost village in the Empire now that Hammel's gone. So he could have easily just been there, but no, Mueller's probably in the capital when this is going on. And Olivier just straight up has access to the longest ranged communications that exist without some sort of entrenched network like the OrbitalNet, which at the present moment in time maybe exists between Crossbell and Le Mans and that's it, but I don't even know about that much. But yeah, a small cool visual thing to add continuity with later games is mostly what I'm expecting from the entirety of first chapter. They might add a bunch of things in second chapter, but stuff like this and altering a few lines to make it more clear that Calvard and the East are two separate things is the most you really can add in FC because of how small and self-contained it is compared to the larger narrative of the entire series. While we're talking about added stuff though, I did come across 3 brand new side quests. One of them was just gathering ingredients for the sous chef in the Anteros restaurant, which was a pretty nothing thing and didn't really add any interesting new dialogue or anything. It was just extra rewards. But 2 more of them are actually significant character things. One of them we kind of knew was coming just based on stuff they were talking about the game before it came out, and that was an Anelace quest that involved fighting alongside her in first chapter. Now, she is not playable, but she does join your party the same way temporary AI-controlled party members in the Daybreak games do. It's only for a couple fights, one of which is your entire party plus Anelace, and one is just her plus Estelle and Joshua, and it is basically just Nebo Valley Monster Quest 2, but Anelace and Sting are there, and you learn a little bit more about the 2 of them, but I still think it's cool. It's mostly non-voiced, but it does become voiced right after the battle ends, where Anelace does just give a full voiced version of her victory quote from the original second chapter. It has been changed in English. It's no longer, I'm invincible or am I? It is, my sword is invincible, just kidding, tee-hee. But, I mean, it's Anelace. It's still adorable. I'm not really going to complain about that. And some of the dialogue from the original game, like her talking about how she's just become a senior bracer and that kind of thing, is moved to this quest instead of other conversations with her throughout FC. So this is mostly fan service for people who like Anelace, and I'm an absolutely massive fan of her new design, by the way. Probably also a bit of an apology for her not being in any games since Sky 3rd, even though they gave her a new design in Cold Steel 4 and just never put her in a game until they remade one she was already in. And then also an extended early introduction to the character in a way that I think makes her and Estelle friends a lot earlier, so it makes even more sense that the 2 of them would go off training together at the beginning of SC. They're giving Anelace more focus now, which makes me think they're going to tweak the end of SC a little bit. And by that I mean, they might give us Anelace and maybe also even Kurt for the final chapter of that game. That was one of the most disappointing things about the original SC, honestly. For the finale of the game, you bring every single party member on the Arce with you, head off to the Liber arc, and then you're joined by new characters, Mueller, Julia, and you're also able to recruit Josette, except Anelace. The second party member from the beginning of the game is not there. I don't know how they're going to do the final dungeon of this game, but given how it's based on the Daybreak combat system, and that game allows you to have 8 characters in your party, 4 on the field at once, and can hot swap out once per turn, there's a good chance that your party is actually going to consist of everyone for the final dungeon of FC, and if they do that there, then they're absolutely going to expand the party in the same way for SC once you get that many party members, and that in and of itself would make the finale of SC a lot more interesting because, well, the problem with giving you 3 party members in the final chapter of the game is the fact that you have a 4-person party, you are locked to Estelle and Joshua, and you need to go all the way back to the Arce to switch party members out. So adding fast travel and the 8-person party would make it a lot more realistic to throw even more party members at you at the end, because you have all the mechanics to actually make proper use of a lot more people. Funnily enough, though, the real star of this Anelace quest was Sting, just the one generic bracer from the Bose branch. And that's because the premise of the quest is, after you beat the Yeti thing and just the normal Nebo Valley monster extermination that exists in the original game, and I think after the next story beat, you can go back to the Bose Guild. Lugren will be like, hey, more of those monsters you killed before showed up. Anelace and Sting went off to deal with them, but they haven't been back for a while. Could you go check on them? And then you show up, you bail Anelace out from a fight against one of them, and then you go help Sting. And it's a bunch more monsters show up. Sting, Olivier, and Shara take on 2 small ones, and then Estelle, Joshua, and Anelace fight the boss, and that's the final battle of the quest. But before all of you come and help him out, Sting is facing down 3 of them alone, and he says, "So it's come to this. It seems I'll have to get a bit reckless this time." Which, what does that mean? Does Sting have, like, super secret special extra powers that we're never going to learn about because he doesn't do anything important ever in the original games, so they'd need to add even more quests to expand upon him? We won't know, because Shara hits him with the classic "that won't be necessary" when you come up to save him. So, I don't know. I'm now significantly more invested in Sting the Bracer as a character. I was already completely sold on Anelace, so this quest was more just of, wow, she's adorable. I like seeing more of her. I hope she gets to do even more in the SC remake. But what's up with Sting? Anelace is AI controlled, so I couldn't really get a good gauge of how strong she is overall, and obviously, unless they make her more available in FC, it won't matter at all until the 3rd remake, if that ever happens. But in the first fight she was there for, she moved ahead of everyone, including Joshua, used a non-crit 8-leaf blitz that hit for about as much damage as a non-crit 100 CP craft would have done. So, good for her, I guess. That's the thing. Anelace and Kurt, maybe being playable for more, is cool, but I kinda hope we also get at least AI versions of Karna and Grant at some point, and that's because when you're fighting the other bracers in the lab in SC after they get controlled by Ouroboros, I'm not stupid, right? Like, Grant is easily the hardest of those fights. The Grant special is an unironic one-shot on higher difficulties. I want to see the Grant special used in a battle on my side for once in my life before he obliterates me in SC again. The 3rd new quest was something I really wasn't expecting, but it was an extremely nice surprise and breath of fresh air. And that's because they basically added an entire little slice of life episode where Estelle and Joshua hang out with some of their friends from Sunday school one last time before they head out for bows and into the wider world. We get told all the time that Alyssa and Tio were really close with the Brights, and especially Estelle, for a long time, but we never really get any follow-up on that. We just get told that they're close friends and that they should probably hang out more in the future, and then we never hear anything about them again after 2nd chapter, besides them pointing out that, yep, Tio from Crossbell has the same name as Tio from Laburl, and that's basically it. Here, though, we get a nice cute little quest about Alyssa wanting to come up with a new recipe for her family's restaurant, and Estelle and Joshua bringing her over to the Persil farm to do some farm work and try to look at ingredients and get some inspiration for something. Then we just got cute slice of life stuff of Estelle staring at a chicken. There's a BP-related objective for learning how to milk the cow properly, and the Sky remake cows are certainly video game cows, I'll give them that. There's a bonus objective for more BP about finding a brown chicken that laid a brown egg that Tio lost track of. And then there's a contest to see who can pick the best strawberry, and if you win, you get even more BP. And then it ends with Alyssa taking everyone's suggestions and the experience of working on the farm into account and coming up with a strawberry and cream crepe that the restaurant's eventually going to be able to serve, and you get the recipe for. There have been a few new recipes I've already seen added to this game. The restaurant ingredient side quest in Bose gives you another one. And while the effect of these crepes isn't something that couldn't have existed in the original and isn't super interesting or powerful, the fact that they give you an entire little mini-story about how Estelle and Joshua learned it, and focuses a lot on enhancing the characterization for a couple NPCs who are not important at all to the overall narrative of the series, but are extremely important to the protagonists we're following, is really, really neat. I'm so glad that they're using the opportunity to add new content to Trails in the Sky, to expand on Trails in the Sky itself, and not just add new fan service and foreshadowing for later games. Gameplay-wise, I do think on Nightmare, this chapter was a little bit easier than the prologue, but part of that might be my fault. Whenever I play Trails games, I finish side quests as soon as I unlock them, or as soon as it's possible if it's not immediately, to make sure I don't miss the time they expire, even if I know it's a long way out. Because of that, and the fact that the getting ingredients for the Antarose quest can be gotten almost as soon as you arrive in Bose, I went enemy drop gathering basically as soon as the meat of the chapter started. The item you need to complete that quest is 5 monster tenders, which can only be dropped from some bird-type monsters. There are a lot of birds in Bose in FC, but only a few of them drop this new item, so I wasn't really having a lot of luck actually finding things that dropped them, and it ended up with me discovering the grinding cave for the chapter on West Bose Highway, and save scumming with that until a group of enemies that included the right kind of birds showed up, and getting it from there, which might have resulted in me being a little bit over-leveled for the majority of the chapter. I tried to rectify this just by not fighting enemies throughout most of the rest of the chapter, like on the way to Ravenu I only fought to get things registered in the log and that kind of thing, but that still made almost every monster quest, almost every mid-story boss relatively easy, and I didn't die more than a couple times on monster chests, but the final boss of the chapter still completely smoked me. I don't know what it is. Now that she has shotguns, Josette is infinitely more dangerous than she ever was in any previous game she appeared in. I am really, really glad that for the purpose of getting video footage, if I decide to record more stuff from the game later on in the future, I made a bunch of extra save files before major story beats, because I legitimately had to revert to an earlier save file before checking in at the Kingfisher Inn and go back to Bose, get more quartz, and upgrade some of my equipment more in order to beat the Capwas at all on Nightmare. And that was with also leveling up, I think, one more time than I did the first time I went through. And that's kind of a problem, actually. A problem caused by Falcom not completely updating quality of life of Sky First Chapter to be in line with the other concurrent Trails games. In more recent games in the series, most dungeons, especially ones that you're locked into once you get to a certain story beat and can't return to civilization until you finish them, give you a shop and an orbital factory at an orbment charging station somewhere in the dungeon. That wasn't the case in the original Sky Arc or this remake. Now, that was not a problem at all in the prologue, as Mistwald is just connected to the Elize Highway, which is just connected to Roland, so if you're struggling with Josette and the pirates there, you could just walk back to town. But you cannot leave the Sky Pirate hideout once you get there, which means I would have basically been soft-locked and forced to either lower the difficulty or start a new file from the beginning if I didn't have a bunch of save files. Now I know, save early, save often, save in multiple files. The PC version of the game gives you like 120 save file slots, so it's not like I'm ever going to run out throughout this playthrough. But still, it feels like a thing that wouldn't have been an issue whatsoever if I was playing a more recent game. And up until that happened, besides the battles themselves, I was able to play through like I was playing a Daybreak game, and getting kind of jolted with having to go back and remember, nope, this is a Sky game, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles and modernized features a Daybreak game would, was a little bit jarring. In both fights against her, Josette gets a new craft called Stampede, which does a ton of damage in an AoE, and I really, really hope she gets that when she's playable in the SC remake, because Estelle is a much more versatile and useful character in this version of the game, and is like actually on par with the other party members, at least so far. So if they make Josette good enough to be anything more than a novelty in the next game, that would be really welcome. Don is mostly the same as he was in the original game, but he does get a new AoE melee ranged craft that does a ton of damage and also decreases physical strength and defense, which, given the fact that he can't use arts at all, and Kyle and Josette have one each, you're going to get hit with a lot of physical damage in this fight, so it is pretty debilitating, and I ended up always using morale on every first turn Estelle had in every attempt of the fight once I realized how bad that was. And yeah, it's kind of the same thing as with the prologue fight. There's enough enemies, even though you are 4v3ing them this time, and they have so much speed on Nightmare that you're basically always not all going before the enemies go, and they're going to hit you enough where you better be pre-casting some sort of healing art and hoping the person who did that doesn't die. Because Don's first move is always an AoE that decreases your defense, Josette's first move is always Stampede, and Kyle is almost always going to start with one of his grenades that's either going to burn or blind everyone it hits. And unlike in the original game, you can't alter the positions your party members start out on the battlefield. So unless you can move someone out of the way first, everyone is getting hit by all of those. I absolutely had to go back and make sure everyone had action quartz equipped, and even then, it basically took getting Olivier out of the way from everyone else, because he was going first once everyone had the same level of speed for some reason, pre-casting a Latira, having Joshua run out of the way and clock up Estelle, hoping that would make Estelle move fast enough to get out of the way of Shera and Morale before someone died, and then at that point it did become relatively easy. Once everyone's spread out enough to the point where the only thing that can realistically hit more than 2 people is an art from Kyle or Josette, it does stabilize a lot, but it is also significantly harder to get not only Latir and Latira, but also Thelis on your orbments in this game, at least with the quartz available to you at the time. So it took up a lot of slots on both Shera and Olivier to make sure I even had enough healing to pull something like that off in the first place. Another thing that's really helpful is that Estelle gets Comet a few levels earlier than in the original, and not only does it do arts damage, but it is now also a cone that instead of penetrating defenses, is an impede and bonus stealer. So that was extremely, extremely helpful, because while Shera does have an impede, it's not as long ranged, while Comet does cover the entire battlefield, and Joshua needs to basically be in melee range to use Dual Strike. So it was actually Estelle doing impeding snipes that got me through a lot of fights against enemies that used arts or crafts. Another thing that was really helpful for me too was buying a bunch of ingredients at Bose and Fish at the Valeria Lakeshore, which has been renamed to just Valeria Shore in this version, which I'm assuming was a change where Falcom forced GungHo's hand because the sign when you go near the Valeria Shore says "Welcome to Valeria Shore," so they couldn't really give it a name that didn't match that, I guess. Anyway though, you get small stat bonuses that are party-wide and permanent for completing each recipe for the first time. So I just went and did as many of those as I could, and I got enough defense, arts, and speed boosts where that combined with action quartz got me moving faster than the cap was enough where I could pretty easily set up at the beginning of the fight, and once I had my final setup going, it only took one try to beat them. So it wasn't really a grinding thing, it was just a I wasn't super prepared before going in thing. When you enter the Capua hideout, you do also get access to the burst feature of bravery points, which is a thing like the follow-up attack or like the rush that uses 2 people, except it uses the entire party, hits all enemies, and does a bunch of extra damage and stun, but it costs all 5 points of your bravery meter. This works exactly how it did based on the Cold Steel games it was taken from, and that's really it. The tutorial for unlocking it says you temporarily gained access to this, which means 2 things. The first is that this dungeon is the only time you're going to have 4 party members for a bit, so you can't use it at all, period, until you have 4 people again. But also because it seems like this does have some sort of diegetic in-universe connotations. Olivier is the one to suggest that you do it when you first unlock it, and he says that the 4 of you have been working together pretty well, so they might be able to do something more. Which implies that you will only be able to use this ability when you have characters who work well together or know each other's fighting styles pretty well. And this does somewhat track, as with the exception of Olivier being able to do it as soon as he's introduced, you start out being able to do the 2-person team-up things with Estelle, Joshua, and Shera, who've known each other and trained together for years. This is another technically bit of foreshadowing to the Cold Steel games, as it's eventually revealed in those that not only did Olivier's adventures in Liberl influence the creation of Class 7 itself, but the entire bravery point system in those games is a function of the orbments being able to draw connections between the party members so that they're able to do this kind of attack without really knowing each other as well, with the only requirement being not actively being in dissonance with each other. So it now might be possible that due to what is technically a retcon in the Sky games, the way the Bracers of Liberl fought together influenced Olivier's influence on the designs of the orbments the Cold Steel party members use, which I think is pretty neat. Upon getting to Bose, you do also unlock weapon, armor, and accessory customization, which is just upgrades with you materials and sometimes other materials that works exactly as you would expect in every game starting from 0. You could just get a plus version of all your weapons, a plus version of all your armor, and a plus version of all your accessories. There is also the ability to upgrade your quartz by effectively fusing 2 lower tier ones together into a higher tier one, and there's not really much else to say about that. It works like you'd expect it to if you've played any later game in the series, but it is a welcome thing. Another good change is that weapons come with a strength and an arts bonus just for equipping them, which was not the case in the earlier games. So it makes it a little bit easier for your arts and your physical attacks to scale equally with each other throughout at least the part of the game I've played so far. Kind of weird that we're ending with this because it just happened to be the last thing I thought of, but something I found really funny was the fact that they did not change any of the dialogue about the south block of Bose, and the fact that that's where a lot of people live, and where all the Sky Pirate robberies took place, purely because, thanks to the upgraded technology, Bose is now all one screen, along with the highway to the south, the highway to the east, the highway to the west, basically everything except Nebel Valley in the entire Bose region. So the south block of Bose exists only in dialogue and isn't a separate screen that you travel to from not the south block of Bose. So I kind of forgot where the screen division in the original game was in the first place, which didn't really matter because there were quest objectives, so I knew which houses to go to in the South Block, but it's kind of funny. A person playing this game who never played the original is going to be really confused when they mention South Block because it is all the same thing. And I think it's going to be really funny when similar things like that happen with Ruan in Chapter 2. And speaking of that, I'd like to go on to Chapter 2 because I've been enjoying this game a whole lot so far, and I can't see that stopping anytime soon. So I'm going to play that and then talk to you about it. Till next time, this is Luxon, signing off.